Welcome back to another revision tutorial with Miss Sweet. Today I am looking in great detail at the main aspects of the poem Kamikaze, to get the best marks during an exam if you wish to analyze this poem. Beatrice Garland is a British poet. The poem, of course, is far removed from Garland's own immediate experience, and focuses on the plight of a Japanese kamikaze pilot during World War II. In terms of her own work, this is not unusual. Much of her writing similarly represents a kind of throwing of the voice, an attempt to imagine the world from someone else's perspective. In her own words, I spend a lot of the day listening to other people's worlds. The origins of World War II were multifaceted, but broadly stemmed from Adolf Hitler's ambition to restore Germany's power after the punitive measures of the Treaty of Versailles. The war began in 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, prompting Britain and other nations to declare war. Japan entered the conflict in 1940 through an alliance with Nazi Germany, with Emperor Hirohito supporting the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941. This act escalated Japan's involvement, leading to its occupation of territories such as Singapore and the Philippines. The war concluded on September 2, 1945, with Japan's surrender following the US's use of atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The kamikaze pilot's task, to fly direct into the enemy target, was built on social and military codes of honor and self-sacrifice. These had a lot to do with the samurai warrior tradition, as the presence of the samurai sword slash in the cockpit suggests. Honor and shame are, generally speaking, important parts of Japanese culture. Indeed, they are so integral that the pilot's disgrace seems to disgrace those in his immediate circle as well, and is ultimately why they disown him. Kamikaze uses sestets, 6-line stanzas, from start to finish. Additionally, it's a narrative that can be divided into distinct sections, the first 5 stanzas and the last 2. In the first section, the speaker, the kamikaze pilot's daughter, recounts the story of her father's mission, and how he must have come to change his mind about committing suicide to aid his country's war effort. The last 2 stanzas compress decades of time into a few short phrases, outlining the way that the pilot's mid-air choice was a false one. That is, he thought he was choosing between life and death, and chose the former because of his instinctive love for family and life's beauty. In reality, his choice was between 2 different deaths, as the last 2 lines state so somberly. Kamikaze is written in free verse, and accordingly, doesn't use a strict metrical scheme. This helps facilitate the way that the poem unfolds. The first 5 stanzas feel particularly fast, as though to mirror the intense speed of a fighter jet, and the pilot's troubled state of mind. Interestingly, the poem does slip into the sound of regular meter right at the end. Here are the last line and a half without the line break. The ending, then, unfolds with the steady sound of iambs, though it could easily go unnoticed given the lack of meter prior to this point. This gives the poem's conclusion a kind of resigned, melancholic sound, which certainly fits with what is actually being said. That is, the stateliness of this section has a kind of inevitable march to its sound, mirroring the way that everything that is being discussed is in the past, and there's nothing more that can be done about it. There is no rhyme scheme in Kamikaze. The lack of rhyme fits with the poem's subject matter. The first section of the poem, the first 5 stanzas, uses the quickness of free verse and enjambment to convey both the fact that the pilot's decision takes place in a fighter jet mid-flight and the busy mind of the pilot as he comes to that decision. That said, the poem does use assonance and consonants here and there in a manner similar to slant rhyme. These moments are relatively quiet, and happen about once per stanza. Symbol of Japan, the reference to sunrise directly connects to Japan, often referred to as the land of the rising sun. It symbolizes national pride and identity, suggesting the cultural and patriotic backdrop of the father's mission. Sunrise can also symbolize a fresh start, juxtaposing the grim reality of the kamikaze pilot's likely death. Sunrise might also evoke the cyclical nature of life and the inevitability of death, hinting that the pilot is embarking on a journey with a foreseen end. In Kamikaze, the sunrise symbolizes hope, honor, and a patriotic call to action. It represents an ideal, the glorified vision of self-sacrifice for the greater good. Similarly, in the myth of Icarus, the sun symbolizes ambition and the human desire to achieve greatness. Both Icarus and the kamikaze pilot are drawn to the sun of their aspirations, whether it's Icarus's desire to reach the heavens or the pilot's sense of duty to his country. In both cases, the pursuit of this ideal is fraught with peril. Icarus, despite his father Daedalus' warnings, flies too close to the sun, embodying the recklessness of ambition unchecked by wisdom. The kamikaze pilot, driven by societal expectations and powerful incantations, embarks on a mission that demands his life. The samurai sword connects to the Bushido code, the way of the samurai, emphasizing loyalty, honor, and self-sacrifice. The sword symbolizes the cultural values instilled in the pilot, particularly the expectation of dying honorably for one's country. The sword might also act as a personal connection to his ancestors and heritage, reinforcing how deeply tradition and family honor are tied to his sense of self. The cockpit symbolizes the physical and emotional isolation of the pilot. It becomes a vessel for his journey and an inescapable space where he must confront his decisions. A shaven head suggests a sense of ritual, discipline, and readiness. It symbolizes the pilot's mental preparation and spiritual purification, aligning with Buddhist or Shinto practices. The act of shaving the head may also signify submission to a collective cause, erasing personal identity in favor of duty. The powerful incantations evoke the idea of prayers or chants, imbuing the moment with spiritual significance. They symbolize the religious and cultural indoctrination that justifies and glorifies the kamikaze mission. These incantations might also represent the psychological conditioning imposed on the pilot, filling his mind with ideas of honor, duty, and sacrifice. The presence of incantations suggests that his mind is not entirely his own, pointing to the tension between personal desire and societal expectation. Both Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland and Exposure by Wilfred Owen explore the psychological and emotional costs of war, offering differing perspectives on sacrifice and duty. In Kamikaze, the pilot is torn between societal expectations and personal desire, symbolized by the powerful incantations that represent cultural indoctrination and his moral struggle to prioritize life over honor. Similarly, Exposure examines the soldiers' mental and physical toll as they endure the futility of war, with the refrain "but nothing happens" reflecting their despair and loss of purpose. Nature plays a significant symbolic role in both poems. In Kamikaze, the sunrise evokes the beauty of life and the tension between hope and the inevitability of death, while in Exposure, the merciless iced east winds highlight the indifferent hostility of nature, mirroring the soldier's suffering. Both poems use nature as a powerful symbol, but Kamikaze presents it as a force that evokes reflection and inner conflict, whereas in Exposure, nature is antagonistic, mirroring the soldier's despair. The pilot in Kamikaze experiences a personal conflict. The powerful incantations suggest he has been mentally prepared to die, but his ultimate decision to return home reflects his longing for life and family. In Exposure, the soldier's personal desires, to return home and survive, are crushed by the relentless demands of war and the harsh environment. The line "for love of God seems dying" highlights the erosion of faith in their cause. Both Kamikaze and Exposure explore the cost of war, but from different perspectives. Kamikaze focuses on a singular act of rebellion against cultural and wartime expectations, reflecting on themes of honor, life, and memory. Exposure critiques the broader futility of war and the physical and emotional toll it exacts on soldiers. The contrast between the sunrise in Kamikaze and the bleak environment in Exposure serves to highlight these differing perspectives on conflict and sacrifice. The line, "till gradually we too learn to be silent," suggests the family's internalization of societal shame. Silence becomes a metaphor for rejection and denial, illustrating how the family conforms to the collective cultural expectation to ostracize someone who fails to uphold honor. The repetition of to be silent, to live emphasizes the deliberate and learned nature of this behavior, showing that shame is not instinctive but imposed and practiced over time. The phrase, "as though he had never returned," symbolizes erasure, with the family treating the pilot as if he had died in the way he was supposed to, during his kamikaze mission. This reflects the cultural prioritization of honor over life, where living dishonorably is tantamount to death. The rhetorical phrase, "he must have wondered which had been the better way to die," underscores the profound inner conflict and psychological torment the pilot experiences. It suggests that his decision to return was not only met with external shame, but also internal doubt. The juxtaposition of "better way to die" reflects the moral ambiguity of his situation. On one hand, dying in the mission would have fulfilled societal expectations and preserved his honor. On the other, returning allowed him to physically survive but led to emotional and relational death, as he was rejected by his family and community. This line encapsulates the central tension of the poem, the value of life versus the cost of living in dishonor. It critiques the cultural norms that devalue human life in favor of abstract ideals like honor. The poem juxtaposes the traditional Japanese code of honor, which glorifies self-sacrifice, with the universal human longing for connection and survival. The pilot's family embodies the societal enforcement of this code, as their silence and rejection reflect the stigma associated with dishonor. At a broader level, the poem critiques the destructive effects of such rigid cultural ideals. The pilot's legacy becomes one of shame rather than heroism, despite his choice being deeply human. In Kamikaze, the family's learned silence and rejection of the father reflect the societal and cultural pressures to uphold honor at the expense of personal relationships. The phrase, "to live as though he had never returned," shows how the pilot's decision to value life over duty fractures his family, isolating him in his own home. Similarly, in Poppies, the speaker grapples with the absence of her son, who has gone to war. Lines like "I was brave, as I walked with you, to the front door" reveal the mother's suppressed emotions and the silent suffering caused by her loss. In Kamikaze, the family's silence is a deliberate act of shame, erasing the father's identity because his actions are deemed dishonorable. The repetition of to be silent, to live emphasizes how this silence is not just external but also internalized, showing how shame shapes their entire existence. In Poppies, silence manifests as emotional restraint. The mother suppresses her feelings to appear strong for her son, but her grief emerges in subtle imagery, such as "steeled the softening of my face." Both poems use silence to explore emotional suppression, but while Kamikaze focuses on societal imposed silence as a response to dishonor, Poppies explores self-imposed silence as a way of coping with loss. The final rhetorical question in Kamikaze, "which had been the better way to die," questions the cost of societal ideals of honor and duty. The pilot's survival leads to emotional and relational death, raising doubts about the worth of such sacrifices. In Poppies, the mother reflects on the personal cost of war, with imagery like "a single dove flew from the pear tree," symbolizing her son's departure and the fragile, ephemeral nature of life. The poem questions whether the sacrifices demanded by war are justified. Both poems critique the glorification of sacrifice, focusing on its devastating emotional consequences for both the individuals involved and their families. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have found this video useful.